Mother-in-law, you're just not at the age to understand these devices anymore, Derek told me, snatching the cell phone out of my hands in my own living room with a smile that turned my stomach. I am Martha. I am 72 years old, and I was widowed 5 years ago by a man who never once raised his voice to me or treated me like I was useless. What my son-in-law didn't know was that the phone he was holding with such arrogance wasn't my only connection to the bank or to my widow's pension. It was my only hidden fund. It had all started a couple of hours earlier on what was supposed to be just another ordinary Sunday. The Sunday routine in my house has been exactly the same for years. I wake up at 6 in the morning, brew a pot of black coffee, and sit out on the porch to look at the backyard. Robert, my late husband, planted a lemon tree near the back fence the same year we got married. Now the tree is massive, casting shade over almost the entire lawn and demanding I sweep up the dead leaves every other day. That Sunday, the air was crisp. I took my time in the kitchen, pulled the roast out of the fridge, prepped the rub with garlic, parsley, and a little olive oil, and turned on the oven. I've always liked having total control of my kitchen. For 35 years, I was the head treasurer of an agricultural co-op in the next county over. I managed the ledgers, the vendor payouts, the deferred checks, and the payroll for 100 employees. Nobody had to tell me how to build a double entry column or how to balance the books. But to Derek, my only daughter's husband, I was nothing more than an old woman who barely knew how to turn on the TV. I heard the engine of Derek's truck parking in front of my house at 12 o'clock on the dot. The roar of that engine always felt excessive to me, just like everything else about him. An oversized vehicle for a guy who changes jobs every 2 years because his bosses just don't know how to appreciate his talent. Footsteps echoed on the sidewalk. The front door swung open without anyone ringing the bell. Carrie, my daughter, has her own key. They blew in like the wind had shoved them through the doorway. "Hi, Mom," Carrie yelled from the hallway, using that high-pitched voice she pulls out when she's nervous or trying to cover up an uncomfortable silence. She appeared in the kitchen, dropping her purse on the clean table. She had dark circles carved under her makeup and a slumped posture. Carrie was always a soft-spoken girl, but ever since she married Derek 10 years ago, her voice didn't just get soft. It became practically inaudible whenever he was in the same room. "How are you, sweetheart?" I asked, giving her a kiss on the cheek. The smell of her floral perfume couldn't quite mask the stale air of the truck ride. Before she could answer, Derek walked into the kitchen. He was wearing a plaid shirt that pulled a little too tight across his gut, carrying that smug expression he never seems to wipe off his face. He didn't even say hello right away. He went straight to the fridge, ripped the door wide open, pulled out a bottle of cold mineral water, and chugged it right from the neck. I just stood there watching him, a dish towel in my hands. "God, it's hot in this house, Martha," he finally said, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "You should turn on the AC in the living room. At your age, heat stroke is dangerous." "The weather is lovely, Derek, and the windows are open," I replied in a deadpan tone. I never gave him the satisfaction of seeing me worked up. "Whatever you say," he muttered, waving me off with a flick of his wrist, and walked into the dining room to turn on the TV. He put on a sports channel, cranking the volume high enough that I could feel the vibration in the crystal glasses I had arranged in the china cabinet. Carrie lowered her eyes and started slicing a loaf of bread on the cutting board. "Don't mind him, Mom. He had a rough week at the office. You know how he gets when his deals don't close fast." "Funny how a difficult deal gives him such a big appetite," I commented without raising my voice, arranging the tray of potatoes to slide into the oven. "And what about you? How were things at the pharmacy?" Carrie is a shift manager at a chain pharmacy. She works 12 hours a day. She's the one paying the rent on the apartment they live in, the one covering the payments on Derek's massive truck, and the one, I assume, keeping that household financially afloat while he chases investments that never quite seem to materialize. "Fine, tired," she sighed, arranging the slices of bread in a wicker basket. "We did inventory on Thursday. My back is absolutely killing me. But Derek says he's about to close a deal with a cleaning supply vendor soon, and I won't have to work overtime anymore." I nodded in silence. I'd been hearing the exact same promise about Derek's imminent deals since Christmas 5 years ago. I didn't say a word. Experience had taught me that criticizing Derek in front of Carrie only made her defend him harder, as if the dignity of her marriage depended on convincing her mother she hadn't picked the wrong man. Lunch dragged on with the usual tension dressed up as normalcy. I served the roast. Derek grabbed the largest portion before I could even offer any to Carrie. He chewed with his mouth half open, talking over the blare of the television. "The economy is completely wrecked, Martha," he declared, pointing at me with a fork that had a chunk of meat stabbed onto it. "People don't know what to do with their money. The banks eat you alive with fees. You gotta know how to maneuver. Right now, I'm putting together a mutual fund with some partners, 20% monthly returns. It's a sure thing." "How interesting," I said dryly, cutting my food into small pieces. "Magic returns always end up being a headache." Derek let out a short, barking laugh. "That's your generation's mindset, Martha. With all due respect, do you guys really think stuffing cash under the mattress or leaving it in a savings account that yields nothing is safe? The world changed. Everything is digital. You have to know how to use the platforms now." I looked at Carrie. She was pushing a piece of potato around her plate, not looking up. "I do just fine with my methods, Derek. I don't have any debt. I pay my taxes on time, and I own my home outright." That last sentence seemed to bother him. The house, the property Robert and I built brick by brick, a 4-bedroom home with a sprawling garden in a neighborhood that had skyrocketed in value over the years. Derek always looked at the walls of my house like he was calculating the price per square foot. Sure, he conceded, wiping his mouth with the cloth napkin and leaving an obvious grease stain. "But let's be real. The pension Robert left you barely covers the basics. And with inflation, that money is worth less every day." Carrie and I were just talking about this in the truck. Carrie's fork clattered against her ceramic plate with a sharp ring. Her head snapped up, eyes wide. "Derek, we said we weren't going to talk about this right now," she whispered, panic bleeding into her voice. "Talk about what, sweetheart?" I asked, setting my silverware down on either side of my plate and crossing my hands in my lap. Derek didn't give Carrie a second to explain herself. He leaned over the table, resting his heavy forearms near my water glass. "About your financial setup, Martha. Carrie worries. You live alone. You're getting up there in years. Bank apps update every single day. There are scams everywhere. Older folks losing everything because they click where they shouldn't. We want to help you." "I don't need help with my bank account. I go to the branch. I use the ATM. I pay my bills online. I've never had a problem." "Don't take this the wrong way, Martha, but the other day, Carrie told me you forgot to pay your homeowner's insurance premium. She had to go pay it for you." I felt a cold spike in my chest. I looked at my daughter. She shrank back into her chair. It was true that last month I had asked her for a favor, to pay the insurance at a physical branch because the bank system was down for maintenance and I had a doctor's appointment at the exact same time. It wasn't forgetfulness. It was a specific favor, and she had handed it over as ammunition to give her husband leverage. "I didn't forget, Carrie. I asked you to do it because I was sitting in the doctor's waiting room. I gave you the cash the night before." Carrie swallowed hard. "Yeah, Mom, I know. I just mentioned it to Derek in passing." "It doesn't matter if you forgot or not," Derek interrupted, raising his voice to seize control of the conversation. "The point is, it's a mental load you shouldn't have to carry anymore. Carrie works too much. I'm building my companies. We can't be running around plugging the holes of your slip-ups. I say this with nothing but love. The most logical thing is for me to manage your pension. You hand the account over to me, I handle your payments, I invest the surplus in my fund, and I give you a clean monthly allowance so you don't have to lift a finger." The silence that followed that proposal was thick, heavy, like the air right before a summer thunderstorm. In the background, the TV kept broadcasting the game, the roar of the stadium filling the dining room, but at our table, nobody was breathing. I kept my eyes locked on Derek's. He stared right back with the blind confidence of a man used to steamrolling people without meeting any resistance. It was the exact same confidence he'd used to isolate Carrie from her friends, the same one he used to convince her to sell her old compact car to buy the heavy-duty truck he drives. I simply offered a single, clear syllable, stripped of any decoration. "No." Derek blinked, totally thrown by the speed of the rejection. "Martha, you didn't even think about it." "There is nothing to think about. I appreciate the concern, but the money Robert left me and my pension are managed by me. If I ever lose my mind, I'll sign a power of attorney over to my daughter. Not to you." Derek's jaw clenched tight. A flush of red crept up his shirt collar. He looked at Carrie, expecting her to jump in and back him up, but my daughter was petrified, staring at the breadcrumbs on the tablecloth like they were a treasure map. "Fine," Derek said, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. "Just don't complain later when your savings evaporate, because you don't know how to invest." I got up from the table and started clearing the plates in silence. The meal was over. The atmosphere was ruined, as usual. I went into the kitchen, dropped the dishes in the sink, and turned on the hot water. The steam fogged up my glasses a little. I took my time washing every fork, every plate, scrubbing with the sponge until every trace of grease was gone. I needed to keep my hands busy. I needed to not say the brutal things flashing through my head. When I finished, I dried my hands and walked into the living room. Derek was sprawled out on my sofa, legs stretched out, staring at his own phone. Carrie was still in the dining room, sitting there wiping the tablecloth with a damp rag in a totally robotic motion. I sat down in the armchair, the one by the window. I pulled my cell phone out of the pocket of my kitchen apron. I needed to check my checking account balance. I wanted to make sure the electric bill had auto-drafted correctly that Friday. I unlocked the screen. The apps popped up. The bank's icon, red and white, sat in the top right corner. I tapped it. The loading screen appeared. I adjusted my reading glasses. The app asked for my 6-digit passcode. I started typing slowly, making sure I didn't hit the wrong number. My close-up vision fails me sometimes, and touchscreens don't have the raised buttons of the calculators I used to run at the co-op. Suddenly, a shadow fell over me. Derek had gotten up from the sofa without me hearing him. He stood right beside me, looking down at my phone screen. "What are you doing, Martha? Fighting with the technology?" he asked, not even trying to hide the mocking tone. "I'm checking a payment. If you'll excuse me, I need to concentrate." "Here, let me help you. You're taking forever." Before I could react, before I could pull the phone out of his reach, Derek reached down and snatched the cell phone right out of my fingers. The movement was fast, aggressive, a complete violation of my personal space. I felt the rough scrape of his knuckles against my hand. I froze. I looked up. He took 2 steps back, holding my phone high, staring at the glowing screen. "Derek!" Carrie yelled from the dining room, appearing in the doorway. "What are you doing? Give my mom her phone back." "Relax, Care. I'm just showing her how easy this is." "Look, Martha, you were typing the password wrong here. That's why it locks you out." "Give me back my phone right this second," I said. My voice came out low, without a tremor, but carrying a firmness that left no room for debate. Derek ignored me. His thumbs were flying across my phone screen. "Mother-in-law, you're just not at the age to understand these devices anymore," he said, letting out a loud, barking laugh that bounced off my living room walls. A raw, humiliating laugh. "I'm managing your pension from today on. It's for your own good. Look, I'm already in your account." My stomach knotted, not out of fear of losing the money, but from the sheer invasion, the absolute disrespect in my own home, the way this man, who had built absolutely nothing in his life, felt completely entitled to take my things by force. "Derek, please," Carrie begged, walking over to him and pulling on his shirt sleeve. "Give it to her. Mom is going to get mad." He shook off his wife's grip with a sharp jerk of his arm. "Don't be annoying, Carrie. I'm setting this up. I'm going to link her account to my fund management app. That way I can monitor the transactions right from my phone. It's fast. A couple of test transfers to confirm the link, and we're done. You'll forget you ever had to go to the ATM to pull out dirty cash. Martha, I'll bring you whatever cash you need for the grocery store every week, like an allowance." The word allowance hung in the living room air. He was reducing me to a child. He was stripping away my autonomy right to my face, hiding behind a supposed modernity that I supposedly couldn't grasp. I stayed quiet, absolutely still in my armchair. That is how I operate. My personality was never to scream or throw a fit or smash plates against the wall. When I worked at the co-op and found out a vendor was inflating prices, I didn't call him up to curse him out. I let him deliver the goods, signed the invoice, and then blocked all his future payments, notifying the bank of the fraud with all the supporting paperwork attached. The vendor only found out he was ruined when he tried to cash the check. Silence is a much sharper weapon than noise. I watched Derek. He was completely absorbed in the screen. His brow was furrowed in concentration as he navigated through my bank account menus. He was looking at my balance, looking at the deposits of my pension, but he wasn't seeing everything. Because the app Derek was looking at, the one linked to my everyday phone number, only held the account where the state deposited my widow's pension every month, an account I kept at the bare minimum needed for living expenses. What my son-in-law didn't know, what nobody in that room knew, was that 15 years ago, Robert and I had opened an account at a totally different bank in my name. An account where we deposited the cash from selling a plot of land out in the county, my entire life savings from the co-op, and Robert's life insurance policies. That account had no app on this phone. That account wasn't touched by just anybody. "How kind of you, Derek," I finally said. My tone was so flat, so utterly devoid of emotion, that Carrie looked at me in terror. She was waiting for me to explode. Seeing me this calm only made the panic in her eyes grow. Derek looked up from the cell phone for a split second, smiling smugly. "See, people understand each other when they talk. I already changed your login password for security. I made it something I'll remember. If you need to make a payment, just let me know." "I'll handle it." He placed the phone face down on the coffee table, like he was confiscating a dangerous toy. Then he rubbed his hands together and walked back toward the dining room. "All right, I'm gonna go take a nap in the guest room for a bit. The food made me sleepy. Care, make me some coffee for when I wake up." And he left. He simply turned around and walked down the hallway toward the bedrooms, shutting the door behind him with a dull thud. Carrie stood frozen in the middle of the living room, staring at the phone on the coffee table. Then she looked at me. Her eyes were brimming with unshed tears. "Mom, I didn't know he was going to do that. I swear to you. We were just talking in the truck about how prices are going up, and he said he wanted to help you." I didn't move from my chair. I looked my daughter up and down. I saw the tension locked in her shoulders, the way she was wringing her hands. It hurt me to see her like this, reduced to the shadow of a mediocre man. But my pain for her wasn't going to stop what I had to do. Affection doesn't mean enabling abuse, and this afternoon, Derek had crossed a line that couldn't be erased with empty apologies. "It's fine, Carrie. Go make your husband's coffee." "Mom, aren't you mad?" "No, sweetheart. I'm not mad. Go to the kitchen." Carrie nodded slowly, relieved she didn't have to face an argument, and retreated into the kitchen. I heard the sound of the metal kettle filling with water. I heard the click of the stove lighter. I got up from the armchair in total silence. I didn't touch the cell phone Derek had left on the coffee table. It was useless to me now. He had changed the password. He had linked the account. He had claimed ownership of the device. He could keep it. I walked to my bedroom. The house was swallowed by a strange silence, broken only by the distant murmur of the TV and the water boiling in the kitchen. I stepped into my room and opened the heavy oak wardrobe. On the top shelf, tucked behind the winter blankets that smell like mothballs, sat an old shoebox. I pulled it down. Inside were my vital documents. I took out my original ID card. I took out a gold debit card that I never carried in my everyday purse, and I took out a hardcover ledger where I wrote absolutely everything down. I went to the coat rack and took down my gray wool coat. I put it on slowly, buttoning every single button with precision. I grabbed my black leather handbag, slipped the documents inside, and slung the strap over my shoulder. I walked out of the bedroom and headed down the hall. Passing by the kitchen, I saw Carrie from behind, pouring coffee into a mug. I didn't stop to say goodbye. There was nothing left to discuss with her. I reached the front door, gripped the cold brass handle, and turned the lock gently so the mechanism wouldn't make a sound. I stepped out onto the porch and pulled the door shut behind me, making sure the latch clicked perfectly into place. The afternoon sun hit my face. I breathed in the crisp Sunday air. It was 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The main branch of my bank, the one down on the Central Avenue, has an automated service lobby and self-service kiosks that run 24 hours a day. But more importantly, I had the direct cell number of the commercial manager, a man who knew Robert and who had known my financial history for 2 decades. And if there was one thing a former treasurer knew how to do flawlessly, it was locking down a system before the thief could even take their first step. I adjusted the strap of my bag on my shoulder and started walking toward the avenue at a brisk pace, never looking back. An hour from now, I was going to be sitting in front of a banking terminal, And when my son-in-law woke up from his nap and tried to open that app to steal what was mine, he was going to find a surprise he wouldn't forget for the rest of his life. The afternoon wind whipped my face as soon as I crossed the front gate, but I didn't stop to button my coat all the way up until I was half a block down. The pavement was littered with the dead leaves the sycamore trees drop this time of year, and the crunch of my own footsteps was the only thing breaking the Sunday silence. At 72 years old, I've learned that rushing is the first mistake desperate people make. I wasn't desperate, I was executing a procedure. I walked down Main Street, keeping my eyes fixed on the corner. I held my black bag tight against my body, feeling the comforting weight of the hardcover ledger pressing against my ribs. Back in my day, as the co-op treasurer, I faced droughts that wiped out entire harvests, trucker strikes that threatened to rot the merchandise in the warehouses, and vendors who tried to slip duplicate invoices past me by weaponizing the chaos. I never solved a single problem by raising my voice. Problems are solved by cutting off the money supply, and Derek, with his tight shirt and the arrogance of a man who has never broken a sweat to earn $1, had just stuck his hand in the wrong cash register. When I reached the corner of the main avenue, I saw that Arthur's newsstand was open. Arthur is a man my age, a widower too, who worked as a dispatcher at the very same agricultural co-op for 20 years before opening his own business. He was organizing some packs of tobacco on the front rack when he saw me walk by. "Good afternoon, Martha," he greeted me, resting his ink-stained hands on the metal counter. "It's a miracle seeing you out walking on a Sunday at this hour. Isn't your daughter visiting? I saw your son-in-law's truck parked out front of your place." I stepped up to the counter slowly. The smell of sweet tobacco and fresh newsprint brought back memories of the mornings Robert used to swing by to buy the paper before heading to the garage. "Good afternoon, Arthur." "Yes, they're at the house. Derek is taking a nap. I just needed to get some fresh air." Arthur let out a dry, humorless laugh and shook his head as he wiped down the candy display glass with a rag. "That boy has a talent for resting that I'd kill for. He came by here about an hour ago, right before lunch. Came to buy 2 packs of the expensive cigarettes and an energy drink." "I imagine he paid in cash," I said in a deadpan tone, even though I already knew the answer. Arthur dropped the rag on the counter and looked me in the eye, lowering his voice out of pure instinct, even though there wasn't a soul on the street. "He told me to put it on his tab, Martha. On your tab, I mean. Threw me some excuse about leaving his wallet in the truck's glove box and not wanting to walk all the way back. I gave them to him because, well, he's Carrie's husband, and I didn't want to disrespect you." I felt a cold pressure at the base of my neck. It wasn't about the money for the cigarettes. It was the absolute casual ease with which Derek threw my name around to cover his petty vices. The exact same ease he used minutes later to commandeer my phone in my own living room. I unzipped my black bag, pulled out my worn leather wallet, and extracted a few high-denomination bills. I placed them on the metal counter, sliding them forward with my index finger until they were right in front of Arthur's hands. "Take it out of this, Arthur, and listen to me carefully," I said, keeping my voice low, but speaking with a clarity that left no room for debate. "From this moment on, my account at this stand is closed to anyone who isn't me. If Derek ever asks for credit in my name again, you tell him I spoke to you and strictly forbade you from extending him a dime. If he gets mad, tell him to come take it up with me." Arthur picked up the bills slowly, nodding his head. He knew that tone of mine. He had heard it plenty of times during the co-op board meetings. "Understood, Martha. Don't worry, I won't spot him so much as a piece of gum. Keep the change, please." "Thank you, Arthur. Have a good afternoon." I kept walking down the avenue. I had 3 blocks left until I hit the bank branch. The sun beat down heavy on the gray sidewalks, but I didn't feel the heat. My mind was running through the architecture of the banking system that handled my pension. Derek had made a monumental miscalculation. He believed technology was the exclusive territory of the young, a language us old folks could only stare at with fear and confusion. He was completely oblivious to the fact that bank computer systems were designed, structured, and approved by people of my generation. The interfaces change, they get more colorful, and you use them by tapping a glass screen. But the underlying logic, the lockdown rules, the security protocols, and the audit trails are exactly the same ones I applied to the co-op's general ledgers 30 years ago. I reached the front of the bank. The tinted glass doors were locked to the public, but the ATM lobby and self-service kiosks were open. I pushed the heavy glass door, which gave way with a metallic hum, and stepped inside. The temperature shift was instant. The air conditioning was blasting, leaving the room freezing and smelling faintly of ozone and floor wax. There was no one else in the lobby. All 4 machines were open, blinking their green lights in the controlled dimness of the room. I walked over to the machine on the far right. It was the newest terminal, the one that let you handle complex transactions without needing a human teller. I stood in front of the screen, pulled the gold debit card out of my bag, the one Derek had never laid eyes on in his life, and slid it into the glowing slot. The machine swallowed it with a sharp mechanical click. The screen asked for my 4-digit PIN. I punched it in firmly, covering the keypad with my left hand out of pure professional habit. The main menu unfolded in front of me. I bypassed the cash withdrawal options and went straight to the linked accounts management dashboard. My primary account, the one holding a lifetime of savings and the cash from selling Robert's land, popped up on the screen with its balance untouched, a number that would have given Derek a greed-induced heart attack if he ever saw it. But that account wasn't my target. I navigated through the menu until I reached the secondary accounts section under the same name. There it was, the checking account where the state deposited my widow's pension every first Friday of the month. I tapped the screen to view the recent transactions for that specific account. The list loaded in a split second. My breath hitched for a fraction of a moment. There it was. At 1:45 p.m., barely 15 minutes after he ripped the phone out of my hands, Derek had initiated an outgoing transfer of $10. The transaction memo read, External Digital Wallet Linking. The recipient was an account registered to Derek H. Suarez, hosted on one of those trendy financial apps that promise magic returns and operate just outside the strict oversight of the Federal Reserve. He wasn't bluffing. He had actually configured his phone to drain my account. That $10 transfer was the bridge. Once he confirmed the money landed without bouncing back, the next logical step would be transferring my entire monthly pension into his investment fund. And knowing his nap schedule, he'd probably pull the trigger the second he woke up, fully confident that I was just sitting in my living room, crying over my own uselessness. I didn't withdraw the money. Pulling the cash out and hiding it in my house would have been a defensive maneuver, a way to brace for the hit. I wasn't there to defend myself. I was there to snap the trap shut. I pulled the gold card out of the slot, tucked it into my wallet, and walked over to the wooden bench pushed up against the glass wall, safely out of frame of the ATM security cameras. I sat down, rested my bag on my knees, and pulled out my hardcover ledger. I flipped through the handwritten pages until I hit the letter R. Robert Castaneda, branch manager. I've known Robert since he was a fresh-faced college grad who took a job as a loan officer at the bank in the next county. I was the one who taught him how to read agricultural balance sheets, so the bank would approve our credit lines for new tractors. Today, Robert wears custom-tailored suits and sits in a glass-walled office on the top floor of this very building. But he never forgot who helped him close his first major deals. I pulled an ancient cell phone out of my bag. It wasn't a modern smartphone with a touchscreen. It was one of those small, rugged black bricks with physical buttons that's only good for making and taking calls. I bought it years ago to have a dedicated emergency line for Robert's family out of state. And nobody, not even Carrie, remembered I had it. I dialed Robert's personal number. The line rang 3 times before it connected. In the background, I could hear the typical noise of a family Sunday. Kids laughing, a dog barking, the metallic scrape of a barbecue grill. "Hello," Robert said. His voice sounded relaxed, completely different from the stiff, formal tone he used Monday through Friday. "Robert, it's Martha. I am so sorry to interrupt your Sunday." There was a second of dead silence on the line, followed by the sound of footsteps walking away from the background noise. When Robert spoke again, the clamor was gone. He had stepped into a quiet room. He knew that if I was calling his personal cell on a Sunday, it wasn't to wish him a happy birthday. "Martha, please. It's no interruption at all. It's wonderful to hear your voice. Did something serious happen? Is your health all right?" "My health is perfect, Robert. I'm calling about a banking irregularity. I need you to log into the system from your contingency laptop." I heard the jingle of keys and the click of a door shutting. "Tell me what happened, Martha." "I'm listening. My son-in-law, Derek Suarez, forcibly took my personal cell phone an hour ago inside my own home. He changed my banking app password without my consent. I just checked my transaction history at the self-service kiosk, and I see he initiated a $10 test transfer to link my pension account to a digital wallet in his name. He intends to manage my pension against my will. Robert let out a curse under his breath, a heavy word he quickly tried to cover up by clearing his throat. That son of a... Excuse my language, Martha, but that is a serious federal offense. Do you want me to freeze the pension account so he can't move a single dime? I can do it in 2 minutes. I kept my eyes locked on the empty street through the bank's glass wall. No, Robert, freezing my account only stops the bleeding temporarily. Tomorrow he could just force my daughter to come down to the branch with some fabricated excuse. I need you to trigger the security protocol for digital identity theft. Level 3. Total silence fell over the line. Only the sound of Robert's breathing came through. He knew exactly what I was talking about. Level 3 wasn't a simple preventative freeze. It was a weaponized tool designed by the fraud department to dismantle scam rings. Martha, if I trigger a level 3 fraud alert, the system doesn't just freeze your pension account. The algorithm traces the IP address and the digital footprint of the device that initiated the test transfer. Your son-in-law's phone will be flagged in the National Banking Database as a device used for phishing and elder financial abuse. I know, I replied, my voice completely flat without a drop of hesitation. That means, Robert continued, slipping into a strictly professional tone, that as an automatic security measure, the Federal Reserve will order the preventative freezing of all accounts, credit cards, and digital wallets installed on that device or associated with Derek Suarez's name. He will be financially paralyzed. He won't be able to buy a cup of coffee with a card until he physically shows up with a lawyer to explain why he tried to hijack a pensioner's account. I think that's an excellent security measure for the times we live in, Robert. The world changed. Everything is digital. You have to know how to use the platforms now. Like my son-in-law says. Robert let out a short, almost imperceptible laugh, dripping with grim respect. You're still the exact same strategist you always were. Martha, give me 5 minutes. I'm booting up the office computer in my study. I'll flag the event as a red-level cybersecurity alert detected by internal monitoring. You don't have to do another thing. I appreciate this immensely, Robert. I'll swing by your office on Tuesday and bring you a jar of those canned peaches you like. Not necessary, Martha. It's my job to protect our clients. In 5 minutes, that boy's phone is going to turn into a very expensive paperweight. Take good care of yourself. I hung up. I dropped the old phone back into the bottom of my bag, right next to the ledger and the documents. I stood up from the wooden bench, smoothed out the wrinkles in my gray coat, and walked out of the branch. The warm afternoon air wrapped around me again. It was 3:15. Derek's nap was just about over. I decided not to walk straight back. I went 2 blocks further down to the bakery by the square, which always opens on Sunday afternoons. There was a short line. I waited my turn patiently, watching the kids play on the swings in the park. When my turn came, I ordered a fresh loaf of French bread and half a pound of butter biscuits. I paid in cash, took the brown paper bag that radiated a comforting heat, and started the walk back home. I needed to walk in holding something completely mundane. Normalcy is the best camouflage for devastation. The walk back felt shorter. As I got closer to my street, I noticed the front door of my house, the same one I had shut with such care, was cracked open. I walked up the 2 porch steps without making a sound. I pushed the wooden door. The atmosphere in the living room was radically different from the one I had left behind. The heavy, lazy peace of Sunday digestion was gone, replaced by a crackling electric tension. Derek was standing in the middle of the dining room, pacing in tight circles like a caged animal. His shirt collar was unbuttoned, and his face was flushed, beaded with a cold sweat that had nothing to do with the weather. He was gripping his own cell phone in his right hand, jabbing the screen with his index finger so hard it looked like he was about to crack the glass. Carrie was sitting on the edge of one of the dining room chairs, hands clamped between her knees, crying silently. Her makeup was smeared, leaving 2 dark streaks under her eyes. I stepped into the hallway, shut the door behind me with an audible click, and walked toward the table. I placed the bag of bread on the clean tablecloth with absolute unhurried calm. Derek stopped dead in his tracks when he heard me. He snapped his head up and pinned me with a glare loaded with fury and total bewilderment. "Martha," he yelled, taking 2 quick steps toward me, closing the distance in a threatening lunge. "Where the hell did you go?" I took off my gray coat with slow, deliberate movements, draping the garment over the back of my chair before I answered. I looked him dead in the eye, not backing up a single millimeter. I went for a walk, Derek, and I stopped by the bakery. I thought you guys might like some fresh biscuits with your coffee when you woke up. Did you sleep well? My son-in-law's jaw tightened until the muscles in his face were visibly twitching. He raised his phone and pointed the glowing screen right at me, though I didn't need to see it to know what it said. Don't play dumb with me, Martha. What did you do? Who did you call? I don't understand you, Derek. What are you talking about? I asked, utilizing a tone of flawless, icy politeness, the exact tone he hated because it gave him absolutely zero edges to grab onto for a fight. My app, he roared, shaking the device in the air. I woke up, tried to log into my account to check some investments, and the system bounced me out. It's telling me my user profile is locked for security reasons. I thought it was a network glitch. I tried opening my other app, my savings one, and it's locked too. I looked at Carrie. She sobbed, covering her mouth with one hand. Mom? Derek tried to pay his truck insurance from his phone and got a red error screen. It says all his accounts are frozen. I turned my attention back to Derek. I tilted my head slightly, faking a look of maternal concern. Oh, how awful, Derek. You were just telling me at lunch that there are scams everywhere. You probably clicked somewhere you shouldn't have. These modern apps are so treacherous. Sometimes you tap the wrong button and lose everything. I didn't tap the wrong button, he exploded, completely losing his composure, his voice pitching high with desperation. I called the bank's automated line. The machine told me my cards were disabled due to a fraud protocol detected on my device. Fraud, Martha, on me. He ran his free hand through his hair, messing it up. Panic was starting to overtake the anger. A man who lives off appearances and shuffling other people's money around is nothing without access to his accounts. I have nothing to do with your businesses, Derek. You're the financial expert in this house, aren't you? You're the one who manages the funds, the one who knows how to maneuver. I'm sure you can get it sorted out first thing tomorrow. Derek ground his teeth. He took another step toward me, invading my space, trying to use his size to intimidate me, exactly like he did when he snatched the phone out of my hands hours ago. Did you do something? He hissed, dropping his voice to a threatening growl. You left this house and you went and did something. I saw the test transfer. It went through perfectly. The account was linked, and half an hour later my phone turns into a dead zone. You called the bank and reported me. I didn't flinch. I kept my arms relaxed at my sides. The smell of warm bread filled the space between us, an absurd contrast to the violence bottled up in the room. I didn't report anyone, Derek. I don't have the power to freeze your personal accounts. I'm just an old woman who barely knows how to turn on the TV, remember? He stood paralyzed. My own words, the ones he used to humiliate me, were bouncing back at him like a merciless mirror. He opened his mouth to scream at me again, but the ring of the house landline cut him off. The phone mounted on the kitchen wall started ringing with its sharp, mechanical trill. Carrie jumped in her chair. Derek snapped his head toward the kitchen, eyes wide. Nobody called the landline on a Sunday afternoon unless it was an emergency. I walked slowly into the kitchen, brushing right past Derek without so much as grazing him. I pulled the receiver off the hook and pressed it to my ear. Hello, I said. Martha. It's Robert, the manager's voice said, sounding strictly professional now. Sorry to bother you again. I'm just calling to confirm that the cybersecurity department has issued the automated report. I'm listening, Robert. Derek stepped up to the kitchen doorway, holding his breath as he listened to my half of the conversation. The usurpation attempt was logged, Robert explained. The system detected that an attempt to drain a pensioner's account was initiated from Derek Suarez's mobile device. Because it is a federal crime, the bank has already forwarded the automated report to the district attorney's office for attempted elder financial fraud. I'm letting you know so you're prepared if they contact you to ratify the charges. I felt a deep, anchoring calm settle into my chest. The machinery was in motion, and there was no human way to stop it now. I understand perfectly. Thank you for your diligence. Good afternoon. I slammed the receiver back onto its cradle with a sharp crack. I turned around. Derek was standing in the doorway, face pale, completely drained of color. Who was that, Martha? He asked. His voice carried zero arrogance now. All that was left was the raw terror of a man who had just stepped on a landmine. I looked him up and down, taking in his sweaty shirt, the useless phone in his hand, his defeated posture. It was the bank's automated system, Derek, I said with an irony so dry it practically cut the air. It seems the technology flagged an attempted robbery against a pensioner from a phone registered in your name. And you know how these modern platforms are. Once they flag you as a scammer, there's no going back. Derek took a step back, as if my words had physically struck him in the center of his chest. His eyes, which always looked down on me with that mix of chronic boredom and disdain, were now bulging, locked onto my face, begging for some sign that this was all a sick joke. But I don't joke about money, and I especially don't joke about mine. The silence that settled into the kitchen was absolute, so heavy that the hum of the old refrigerator sounded like a jet engine. My son-in-law's face went from dead pale to a blotchy, irregular red, the exact color blood turns when panic spikes your blood pressure. He raised his useless phone, stared at it like the device had betrayed him, and then pointed his index finger right at me. The fingernail was visibly trembling. "You're crazy," he said, his voice cracking, hoarse, losing every ounce of his businessman facade. "You don't understand what you just did. It's a system glitch. It has to be a system glitch. I didn't steal anything from you. I didn't move from my spot by the counter. I picked up the brown paper bag holding the French bread and the biscuits. I rolled the top down so the heat wouldn't escape and set it on the cutting board. My movements were slow, deliberate. I wanted him to see that his absolute panic didn't alter my pulse in the slightest. The system doesn't make mistakes when it comes to tracking where an order comes from, Derek," I replied in the exact same monotone voice I used at the co-op to read the annual balance sheets. "You took my phone, you changed my security password, you linked my account to your digital wallet, and you executed a test transfer. All of that leaves an indelible digital footprint. The bank simply put two and two together." "It was to manage your payments," he screamed, swatting at the air. "I told you in the living room. I warned you I was going to do it." Carrie, who had been sitting petrified in the dining room chair, slowly stood up. She walked toward the kitchen doorway, dragging her feet like she suddenly weighed 200 pounds. Her makeup was smeared, tracing two dark lines down her cheeks, and she had the hollow stare of someone who just watched a load-bearing wall collapse inside their own home. "Derek," my daughter muttered, her voice so thin it barely carried over the hum of the fridge. "You were going to take my mom's money. You were going to drain her pension account." He spun toward her violently, looking for a lifeline, looking for someone to manipulate. "No, Carrie, for the love of God," he pleaded, stepping toward her with his hands open in a gesture of fake desperation. "I was going to invest it, I swear to you. There's an investment fund closing first thing tomorrow morning. I needed the liquidity to buy into the pool. It was a bridge loan. In 15 days, I was going to give your mother her capital back with a 20% return. It was for us, Care, to pay the past due payments on the truck." Hearing the phrase bridge loan, my mind inevitably traveled back into the past, dragged down by the weight of a memory I had kept locked away for 5 years. It was exactly a Tuesday afternoon in November. Carrie had shown up at my house crying, eyes swollen, holding the keys to her little compact car in her hand. Derek had convinced her to sell her vehicle, the one she bought herself with her very first savings from the pharmacy, to use the cash as a bridge loan to put the down payment on the high-end luxury truck he drives today. I sat with her in this exact same kitchen, brewed coffee, and listened to her justify him. "It's just that Derek needs a presentable vehicle for his client meetings, Mom. He promised me that in 6 months he'll buy me a brand new car with his commissions." 5 years had passed. Carrie rides the bus 2 hours every single day to get to the pharmacy, enduring the freezing winter and the suffocating summer heat, while Derek parades his truck downtown. That afternoon, as I dried my daughter's tears with a paper napkin, I knew that the man sleeping in her bed was a professional parasite. I didn't say a word to Carrie so I wouldn't push her further into his arms, but the very next morning, right when the doors opened, I went to the bank and opened the secret account. I knew the parasite sooner or later was going to try and feed off me. The gold card was born from that memory, from the sight of my daughter crying over a car she never got back. I snapped back to the present. Carrie was looking at her husband like he was a total stranger. The sound of his own excuse seemed to have ripped a veil from my daughter's mind. "The past due payments on the truck," Carrie repeated, furrowing her brow. "Derek, you told me the truck was fully paid up. You took half my paycheck last month, specifically to pay the insurance and the registration." Derek's face crumbled. The lie had collided head-on with reality at the absolute worst possible moment. "A deal got complicated, Carrie," he exploded, completely losing his mind, pointing a furious finger at her. "You don't understand anything about finance. That's why we're in the mess we're in. If your mother wasn't a hysterical, paranoid old bat, we'd have that money multiplied by tomorrow. But no, the lady prefers to call the bank and ruin my life." He took giant strides toward the landline phone hanging on the wall, right beside me. I stepped aside, yielding the space with a freezing courtesy. Derek yanked the receiver off the hook violently, nearly ripping the cord out of the base, and started dialing the bank's customer service number, the 1-800 printed on the back of all the cards. He jammed the plastic against his ear, mouth breathing, sweating profusely. His plaid shirt was plastered to his back in dark patches. The speaker on the receiver was loud enough that Carrie and I could hear the metallic, pre-recorded voice of the automated system. "Welcome to the customer service network. Please enter your social security number followed by the pound key." Derek punched the numbers in with rage. There was a 3-second pause. Elevator music played briefly, followed by a sharp click. "We regret to inform you that your social security number has been placed on a preventative hold by order of the Cybersecurity and Fraud Compliance Department of the Federal Reserve. All linked accounts, credit cards, debit cards, and investment portfolios have been frozen under a Level 3 protocol. Please visit your nearest branch during normal business hours with legal representation. Thank you for calling." The line went dead on its own. The dial tone filled the kitchen. Derek stood frozen, the receiver glued to his ear. The auditory confirmation of the disaster had obliterated his final hope that I was just making it all up. His financial world, the house of cards he had built with lies, unpaid credit lines, and other people's money, had just been demolished by a banking security algorithm. He hung up the phone slowly. He didn't look at me. He looked at his own hands, the exact same hands that had arrogantly ripped the cell phone away from me hours earlier. The look of sheer shock, of total disbelief in the face of a rigid system he couldn't manipulate by yelling, brought up my second memory of the afternoon, a direct flashback to my years as the agricultural co-op's treasurer. A decade ago, there was a contractor, a massive guy named Frank, who hauled grain from the silos to the port. Frank had a habit of padding his mileage on the freight invoices. When I caught the discrepancy, I didn't go down to the loading dock to scream at him. I simply adjusted the monthly payout system, deducted every stolen penny, and flagged his vendor account. Frank came kicking down my office door, screaming profanities, threatening me with million-dollar lawsuits, and swearing he'd ruin my reputation. I remember looking at him over the rim of my reading glasses, exactly the way I was looking at Derek right now, and sliding the general ledger across my desk. "Bury me with my own numbers if you can, Frank," I told him. The contractor ended up in federal prison for tax fraud 2 years later. Loud men always underestimate the power of silence and flawless documentation. They think fear is the only currency that matters, never realizing that precision is far more lethal. "My cards," Derek muttered, talking to himself. "The auto draft for the rent, the health insurance, the crypto apps, everything is in my name. Everything is linked to that phone." He turned to face me. The fury was completely gone, replaced by absolute panic, the raw terror of an animal feeling the steel trap snap shut on its leg. "Martha, please," he said. It was the first time in 10 years I had ever heard him say the word please without a coat of sarcasm. "You have to call that manager, Robert. You know him. Call him right now. Tell him it was a mix-up, that we were just joking around, that I was setting up your account with your permission, and the system misread the transaction." I stared at him, crossing my hands over the apron I still hadn't taken off. "The system doesn't misread anything, Derek. The system logs facts. And the fact is that you forcibly took my phone, you changed my security passcode, and you transferred cash into your account. That isn't a joke. That is called theft." "But I didn't take anything. It was $10 miserable dollars," he screamed, the desperation stripping away his pleading tone. "You can't ruin my life over $10. I am not ruining your life over $10. I am stopping you before you ruin mine over my entire life savings. I'll give you the phone back. Here, take it." He shoved his hand into his pants pocket, pulled out my cell phone, and slammed it down on the kitchen table with a heavy thud. The device that was his trophy just hours ago was now burning his hands. I don't want it, Derek. It's useless to me now. The line is compromised. I'll go buy a new one tomorrow with a brand new number. Carrie took a step forward. Her eyes were locked on the phone sitting on the table. Mom, my daughter started to say, but her voice cracked. She rubbed her arms like she was freezing, even though the kitchen was warm with the afternoon sun pouring through the window. If Derek's accounts are locked down, we aren't going to be able to pay the apartment rent this week. We're going to get evicted. That was the low blow, the human shield. Derek always used Carrie as a blast wall whenever his deals blew up in his face. If he was going down, he made sure to drag her down with him so people would feel sorry for her and forgive him by extension. I looked at my daughter with a profound sadness, but I didn't let my posture waver. Tough love is the only cure for willful blindness. Your apartment lease is in your name, Carrie. You have your own direct deposit account from the pharmacy. You earn your own money working 12 hours a day. If you stop paying the installments on your husband's truck, you'll have more than enough cash left over to cover the rent. Derek let out a hysterical laugh, grabbing his head, yanking his own hair violently. Right. That was your plan all along, he bellowed, pacing in tight circles in the cramped kitchen space. You always hated me. You always wanted to pull Carrie away from me. You found the perfect excuse to leave me out on the street and turn my own wife against me. You're a snake, Martha. A snake dressing up as a helpless old grandma. The third memory hit me right then. It wasn't a distant memory, but one from just a few hours ago. Early that very morning, Sunday morning, I was sweeping the leaves under the lemon tree in the backyard. Robert had planted that tree. Robert, a man who worked from sunup to sundown in his mechanic shop, who came home with hands stained black with grease, but who never touched a single dime of my co-op salary because he always said a woman's work is sacred and it belongs to her. Robert taught me how to drive. He taught me how to change a tire. He taught me that respect isn't demanded, it's built. I remembered the way Derek had barged into my house today without ringing the bell, ripping open the fridge like he owned the place, complaining about the heat, demanding the AC, cranking the TV volume until my crystal shook. I remembered the word allowance. He had offered me an allowance out of my own money. The humiliation wasn't an accident. It was a method. And when faced with a method of destruction, the only thing that works is a method of defense. I don't hate you, Derek. I answered with a calm so absolute it seemed to unnerve him more than any insult could. Hate requires too much energy, and at my age, I prefer to spend my energy taking care of my plants. I am simply defending myself. You walked into my house thinking I was a piece of antique furniture you could just empty the drawers out of. You were wrong. You are going to call the bank, he demanded, slamming his closed fist onto the granite counter. The coffee mugs Carrie had set out hours ago rattled in their saucers. You are going to call and you are going to drop the charges, or I swear to God I will sue you for defamation. I have lawyers. I have connections. Your lawyers charge fees, Derek, and you don't have the means to pay them for an initial consultation, let alone a retainer, because your accounts are frozen solid. And as for your connections, I highly doubt they want to get tangled up in a federal investigation for scamming a widow. Derek opened his mouth to fire back, but no sound came out. In a fraction of a second, he realized the flawless trap he had walked into out of pure arrogance. He had no cash because I had cut off his tab at Arthur's newsstand. He had no access to his cards, no access to his digital savings. He was a financially dead man, and the key to the padlock was held by the woman he had just called useless. He took a deep breath, trying to pivot his strategy. Aggression hadn't worked. Panic hadn't worked. He tried playing for pity. Martha, listen to me. If this goes to the DA, they're going to indict me. They could hold me in pretrial detention as a flight risk or for obstruction. You don't want to see your daughter's husband in a jail cell, right? Do it for care. Look at her. This is destroying her. I turned my head to look at Carrie. My daughter was leaning against the doorframe, crying silently, thick tears sliding down to her chin. But she wasn't crying out of fear. She was crying out of sheer exhaustion, the exhaustion of holding up a coward for 10 years. I walked over to her, stopped inches away, reached out my hand and stroked her cheek, wiping away a tear with my thumb. Sweetheart, I told her, using the gentle tone I used when she was a little girl, and scraped her knee on her bike. For 10 years, I have watched you shrink yourself. I have watched you lower your voice, slash your budget, sell your belongings, and work until your back gives out, all to maintain the illusion that he is some successful entrepreneur. I am not destroying him. He destroyed himself the second he decided to cross the legal line. The question you need to ask yourself today isn't what I am going to do. The question is, what are you going to do tomorrow when the police show up with a warrant for the phone he used to try and rob your mother's pension? Carrie closed her eyes and let out a choked sob. She nodded slowly, a barely perceptible motion, but one loaded with crushing finality. She was waking up. The pain was immense, but it was the pain of the cure, not the disease. Derek saw that nod. He watched his wife, his safety net, his personal ATM, slipping right through his fingers. "You're both crazy," he roared, backing out into the hallway, tripping over a dining room chair. "You both deserve to end up completely alone. I'm leaving this house. I'm going to find my lawyer, and when I get back, I'm putting both of you out on the street." He spun around and stormed down the hall with clumsy, heavy steps. I heard his boots pounding against the hardwood, followed by the sound of the front door being yanked open and slammed shut with a force that rattled the picture frames on the walls. A second later, the engine of his massive truck roared out on the street. The tires screeched against the asphalt as he peeled out at full speed, running away from his own disaster, fully convinced he could still find an exit ramp out on the Sunday streets. Carrie and I were left alone in the house. The silence returned, but this time it wasn't a tense silence. It was the clean, scrubbed silence that settles in after a hurricane passes and washes all the garbage away. My daughter wiped her face with the back of her hand. She looked at me with bloodshot eyes. "He left, Mom. He went to burn gas he isn't going to be able to pay for when he needs to fill the tank." "Carrie." I walked back to the counter. I grabbed the brown paper bag and pulled out the French bread, still warm, and the butter biscuits. I arranged them in a wicker bread basket. Then I took the 2 mugs of cold coffee sitting on the counter, dumped them into the sink, and turned on the faucet to rinse them out. "Sit down, sweetheart," I instructed, pointing to the kitchen chair. "I'm making fresh coffee. Do you need something to eat?" Carrie obeyed. She sat at the table, resting her elbows on the wood, staring at the bread basket like it was a magical artifact. While I filled the metal kettle with water and clicked the stove burner on, I looked out the kitchen window. The sun was already dipping behind the treetops in the backyard. The lemon tree was casting a long, dark shadow across the grass. The afternoon was coming to an end. I knew perfectly well that Derek's dramatic exit was just the flailing of a drowning man. He wasn't going to find a single lawyer willing to work on credit on a Sunday afternoon to defend a guy whose accounts were frozen on suspicion of bank fraud. He was going to drive that truck around in circles. He was going to try and swipe his cards at some gas station. He was going to get declined. He was going to feel the exact public humiliation he had tried to force on me in the privacy of my living room. And when the reality of his financial isolation became unbearable, he'd have to come back. He'd have to show his face to the only authority who could unlock the hell he had locked himself into. The water in the kettle started to boil, letting out a steady, low whistle. I killed the heat, prepped the filter, poured the hot water over the coffee grounds, and let the bitter, comforting aroma fill the kitchen, completely pushing out the smell of sweat and fear Derek had left behind. I poured the steaming coffee into the clean mugs. I carried one to the table and set it in front of Carrie. Then I sat down across from her, picked up a butter biscuit, and took a small bite. Tomorrow was Monday. The banks would open their doors to the public at 10 in the morning. I knew Robert Castaneda would be sitting in his office with the printed cybersecurity report on his glass desk. And I knew that Derek, without a dime in his pocket and with the terror of a federal subpoena breathing down his neck, would have absolutely no choice but to show up at that branch. What Derek didn't know as he burned through his gas on the empty city streets was that I wasn't going to be waiting for him at my house. I was going to be sitting in the bank's waiting room, wearing my gray coat and holding my hardcover ledger, ready to have the final conversation right in front of the people who actually mattered. The net was already cast, and the fish, blinded by his own arrogance, was swimming straight to the bottom. Monday morning broke cold, with that thick frost that leaves the grass white and crunching under your shoes, announcing that winter was right around the corner. I got up at 6 o'clock on the dot, exactly as I have every single day of my life since I can remember. Routine has a healing power. It anchors you to the ground when everything around you feels like it's shaking. I went to the kitchen, turned on the burner, and put the kettle on for coffee. The silence in the house was deep, But it was no longer a silence loaded with tension. It was loaded with resolution. Carrie had slept in her old bedroom, the same one she used before she married Derek. Last night, after her husband fled in his truck, my daughter had collapsed into the kitchen chair, crying until she completely ran out of tears. I let her let it out. I didn't feed her cliches, and I didn't try to comfort her with white lies. I made her bed with clean sheets that smelled like lavender, and tucked her in, like I did when she was a little girl with a fever. Sometimes a fever of the soul just needs to be sweat out in your childhood bed. While the water heated up, I heard the floorboards creak in the hallway. Carrie appeared in the kitchen doorway. She was wearing one of my light gray wool sweaters that swallowed her frame a bit. Her eyes were puffy and her hair was pulled back in a messy bun. But her posture was entirely different. She wasn't slumping anymore. There was a new rigidity in her shoulders, the rigid spine of someone who has hit rock bottom and realized the floor is solid. "Good morning, Mom," she said, her voice still a little raspy from last night's tears. She walked over and kissed my cheek, a gesture she hadn't done with such natural ease in years. "Good morning, sweetheart. Sit down, the water's almost ready. Did you manage to get any sleep?" "More than I thought I would," she admitted, sitting at the table and wrapping her hands around the empty mug I slid in front of her. I woke up a couple of times expecting to hear the engine of Derek's truck, but he never came back. I checked my phone. I have 20 missed calls from him between 2 and 4 in the morning, and a ton of voicemails. I poured the first cup of coffee. I took a sip to make sure the temperature was right, and then poured hers. "Did you listen to them?" I asked, sliding the steaming mug toward her. Carrie took the mug with both hands, soaking up the heat from the ceramic. She shook her head slowly, staring down at the dark liquid. "No, and I don't plan to. It's always the exact same script. First he yells, then he threatens, then he cries, and at the end he blames me for everything so that I end up apologizing for the things he did wrong. I know the cycle by heart, Mom. I don't want to hear it anymore." I nodded in silence. The clarity with which she spoke filled me with a quiet pride. The spell was broken. At 9:30, we're leaving for the bank. Carrie. Robert is expecting me in his office before they open the doors to the public. I want you to come with me, not to defend me, but so you can hear with your own ears what the paperwork has to say. Numbers don't lie, they don't manipulate, and they don't throw tantrums. "I'm going with you," she replied, not hesitating for a second. We finished breakfast with the calm focus of people preparing for a heavy work day. I dressed with care. I put on a pair of classic cut black dress pants, a crisp white blouse, and my dark gray coat. I brushed my hair in front of the bathroom mirror, making absolutely sure not a single white hair was out of place. Appearances in the world of numbers and institutions are your first line of defense. If you walk in looking like a victim, they treat you like a victim. If you walk in looking like an auditor, they hand you the books. I packed my hardcover ledger and my ID card into my rigid black leather bag. We walked out of the house at 9:15. The crisp morning air hit our faces, clearing away any lingering trace of sleep. We walked the 10 blocks that separated us from the main avenue. The town was already bustling. The metal roll-up doors on the storefronts were clattering open, delivery trucks were double parking, and people were rushing to clock in. Nobody paid us any mind. We were just an older woman and her daughter walking down the sidewalk, invisible to the eyes of the world. Exactly how I like to operate. We reached the bank branch at 9:30. The tinted glass doors for the general public were still locked, and a small group of seniors had already formed a line on the sidewalk waiting to cash their checks. I didn't join them. I walked toward the side service door, the one used by the armored truck guards and upper management. I pressed the discreet buzzer embedded in the granite wall. A few seconds later, the door popped open with an electronic buzz. A private security guard, uniform spotless and a hand resting near his radio, poked his head out. "Good morning." "The branch opens at 10, ma'am," he said with automatic politeness, fully prepared to shut the door in our faces. "Good morning. I am Martha. Manager Castaneda is expecting me." The guard blinked, checked a small notepad he pulled from his shirt pocket, and his entire demeanor shifted instantly. He pulled the door wide open and stepped aside. "Come right in, Miss Martha. Mr. Castaneda let me know you were coming. I'll escort you upstairs." We stepped into the empty bank. The contrast with the noise of the street was absolute. In here, The AC held the temperature perfectly steady, and the only sounds were the hum of computers booting up and the sporadic clicking of tellers prepping their stations. We walked across the polished marble floor, passing rows of empty chairs, until we reached the spiral staircase leading up to the management offices. We climbed the stairs. Carrie was walking behind me, taking everything in with a bit of apprehension. To her, the bank had always been hostile territory, a place where they told her checking account was overdrawn or that her husband's credit card had been declined. To me, this was my home turf. This was the exact same language of spreadsheets and balance sheets I spoke for 35 years at the co-op. Robert's office was at the end of the hall. It had glass walls that gave him a clear view of the entire ground floor. It was a strategic position of absolute control. Robert was sitting behind his mahogany desk, reading a blue folder. When he saw us approaching, he stood up immediately, buttoned his tailored gray suit jacket, and stepped out to greet us. "Martha, what a joy to see you, despite the circumstances," he said, extending his hand with firm respect. His face reflected the exact same professional gravity I had taught him to cultivate when he was just a kid. "Good morning, Robert. Thank you for seeing us so early. This is my daughter, Carrie." Robert shook Carrie's hand with a warm smile, meant to put her at ease. "A pleasure, Carrie. Please, come in and have a seat. I ordered some coffee. It should be here shortly." We walked into the office. The room smelled like fresh printer ink and clean leather. We sat in the two chairs facing the desk. Robert returned to his seat, pushed the glass door shut, and opened the blue folder he had been reading. He slid it gently across the wooden surface until it was right in front of me. "This is the official report from the Central Network Cybersecurity Department, issued last night at 8 p.m., Robert explained, folding his hands on the desk. "Just as you suspected, Martha. The maneuver was sloppy and left tracks everywhere. The system logged the access to your pension account from an IP address mapped to the mobile network of a device registered to Derek H. Suarez." I opened the folder. The pages were dense with code, serial numbers, and timestamps, but right in the center of the page was a box highlighted in light gray summarizing the transaction. I didn't need my glasses to read the number. $10 exactly transferred at 1:45 p.m. on Sunday. I turned the folder so Carrie could see it. My daughter looked down at the paper. Her eyes scanned the printed text. She saw her husband's name. She saw the exact timestamp, the exact moment Derek was supposedly configuring the phone for my own good. Physical evidence, stamped by a financial institution, carries a crushing weight. It obliterates excuses and emotional manipulation in a fraction of a second. "This is an official document, Carrie," I told her quietly, never taking my eyes off her. "It isn't my opinion. It isn't your mother exaggerating. This is what he did behind your back, and behind mine." Carrie swallowed hard. She traced the edge of the paper with her index finger, as if she needed to physically touch the proof to convince herself it was real. "What happens now, Robert?" my daughter asked, looking up at the manager with a firmness that pleasantly surprised me. Robert shifted in his chair, adopting his most institutional posture. "The Level 3 protocol freezes absolutely everything, Carrie. The Federal Reserve, under elder protection regulations, immobilizes the funds of the suspect device's owner to prevent the stolen money from being laundered or converted into crypto assets. Derek Suarez cannot withdraw cash from an ATM. He cannot swipe his credit cards. He cannot transfer balances out of his digital wallets. He is completely isolated from the national financial system. And he could go to jail for this?" she pressed, her voice steady. "That depends entirely on your mother. The bank has already forwarded the automated report to the Cybercrimes Division of the District Attorney's Office. It's standard procedure. The DA will summon Martha in the next few days. If she ratifies that the transfer was executed without her consent, the case goes to criminal court for attempted fraud and identity theft. If she testifies that it was a family mix-up or a misunderstanding, the case is archived, though your husband's accounts will still take weeks to unfreeze due to internal red tape." I looked at Robert. He held my gaze. We both knew I wasn't dropping a single charge. I hadn't come here to forgive. I had come to snap the trap shut. It was 10 minutes to 10. A bank employee walked into the office carrying a tray with 3 mugs of hot coffee and glasses of mineral water. We thanked her silently. I picked up my mug by the porcelain handle, feeling the comforting heat. I walked over to the glass wall of the office and looked down at the ground floor. At 10 o'clock on the dot, the main metal security grates rolled up with a heavy rumble, and the glass doors swung wide open. People started flooding in, forming orderly lines in front of the tellers and filling up the chairs in the waiting area. The usual hum of a bank on a Monday morning filled the room. And then I saw him walk in. Derek walked through the bank doors like a cornered animal. He looked absolutely deplorable. He was wearing the exact same plaid shirt from Sunday, now completely wrinkled and stained with sweat under the arms and across the back. His hair was greasy, plastered to his forehead, and he had deep, dark bags under his eyes, the dead giveaway of a sleepless night, probably spent curled up in the reclining seat of his truck. He walked with fast, erratic steps, darting his eyes around with a mix of fury and sheer desperation. He bypassed the line and headed straight for the ATM lobby, shoving past a young kid who was waiting his turn. He yanked a plastic card out of his wallet and jammed it into the slot violently. He punched in his PIN. From Robert's office upstairs, I couldn't see the screen, but I didn't need to. I watched Derek slam his closed fist against the ATM's metal keypad. The machine spat his card right back out, accompanied by a sharp, high-pitched beep of rejection. "He's here," I announced, never taking my eyes off the glass. Carrie got out of her chair and came to stand beside me. Seeing the state her husband was in, she let out a heavy sigh, but she didn't make a single move to go down there and help him. Down below, Derek wasn't giving up. He took massive strides toward the customer service desks, completely ignoring the ticket machine for the queue. He planted himself right in front of the desk of one of the account officers, a young woman who was currently helping an older couple. "I need my accounts unlocked right now," Derek screamed. His voice echoed across the entire ground floor, making dozens of heads whip around to stare at him. Dead silence fell over the waiting area, broken only by the echo of his demands. "The ATM is rejecting my card. I have auto drafts I have to pay today." The account officer looked at him calmly, used to dealing with agitated clients, though Derek's aggression was off the charts. "Sir, please lower your voice. You need to pull a number and wait your turn." "I'm not waiting for any turn. I'm a VIP client at this bank. I have investments. Call the manager. This is a robbery," he bellowed, slamming his open palm down on the wooden desk. The two seniors being helped shrank back into their chairs in fear. The security guard by the entrance started walking toward Derek, resting his hand on the radio clipped to his belt. It was time. The stage was set, the lights were on, and the audience was in their seats. I turned to Robert. "I think it's time the manager attends to his VIP client," I said, with an irony so sharp it could cut glass. Robert nodded, stepped out of his office, walked over to the balcony railing, and looked down. "Mr. Suarez," Robert called out. His managerial voice, deep and commanding, boomed across the open space of the bank, stopping the security guard dead in his tracks. "I must ask you to stop disrupting the public service area. If you have an issue with your accounts, come up to my office immediately." Derek snapped his head up. Seeing the manager, his face seemed to light up for a fraction of a second with the false hope that he was about to be treated with the privileges he thought he deserved. He adjusted the collar of his wrinkled shirt, shot a disgusted glare at the account officer, and marched toward the spiral staircase with long, arrogant strides. He took the stairs two at a time. Robert waited for him at the office door. "Come in, Suarez. We have a lot to talk about," Robert said, stepping aside to let him through. Derek crossed the threshold of the office, drawing breath to launch into his speech of grievances and legal threats. He opened his mouth to start yelling, but the words caught in his throat. He froze dead in his tracks, 6 feet from the door. Carrie and I were sitting in the chairs facing the desk. I was holding my coffee mug with both hands, leaning back comfortably. My daughter was sitting right beside me, back straight, eyes locked dead ahead. Derek's arrogance disintegrated in an instant, replaced by total panic. He looked at Robert, then at me, then at Carrie, desperately trying to process the flawless ambush he had just walked right into. What are you guys doing here?" he stammered, taking a step back, bumping shoulder first into the glass door Robert had just clicked shut. "We came to review my accounts, Derek," I replied with glacial calm. "Just like you told me yesterday, the world changed, everything is digital now. And since I'm just an old woman who barely knows how to turn on the TV, I figured it was best to come straight to the manager so he can explain how these modern platforms work." Derek swallowed so hard his Adam's apple bobbed violently. The color drained completely from his face. He was trapped in a glass box in full view of the entire bank, cornered by the manager who had the power to ruin him, and the woman he had tried to rob. "This is insane," he muttered, looking at Robert for a way out. "Castaneda, listen to me. This is a family misunderstanding. My mother-in-law blew things out of proportion. I was just setting up her phone to help her with her bills. It was a system glitch. You have to lift the freeze. I spent the night on the street because I couldn't even pay for a hotel. I don't have the cash to buy a cup of coffee." Robert walked over to his desk, stood behind his chair, and planted both hands on the wooden surface, leaning forward slightly. His posture was that of a judge about to hand down a sentence. "The Federal Reserve System does not make family mistakes, Suarez," Robert said, his voice hard and professional. "You attempted to link a pensioner's account to a personal digital wallet without authorization, and you executed a test transfer. That is called identity theft and attempted fraud. And considering the victim is a senior citizen, the law considers it an aggravated offense." "There was no fraud," Derek shrieked, desperation shattering his facade completely. "It was $10. You can't ruin my life over $10. Carrie, tell them. For the love of God, tell them I warned you I was doing this to help us." Derek took a step toward his wife, holding out his hands in a pathetic plea. It was pathetic. The man who yesterday felt like the king of the world in my living room was now begging for mercy in a bank office, wearing the exact same dirty clothes he had slept in. Carrie didn't flinch. She didn't drop her gaze like she used to. She looked him dead in the eye, with a coldness she inherited from me. A coldness she was finally putting to use. "I am not going to defend you, Derek," my daughter said. Her voice was low, but clear, without a single tremor. "I have spent 10 years defending you from your own failures. I have spent 10 years paying your debts and putting up with your abuse in silence. Yesterday you crossed a line that has no way back. You tried to rob my mother right to her face, so no, I'm not going to tell them anything. You're going to have to fix this mess all by yourself." The impact of Carrie's words was devastating. Derek grabbed his head, pulling at his thinning hair, gasping for air like all the oxygen had been sucked out of the office. I used the silence to deliver my blow, a calculated, measured strike, feeding him back every insult and every humiliation with perfect symmetry. I placed my coffee mug on the desk, the porcelain clinking softly. I settled into my chair, smoothed out invisible wrinkles on my black pants, and stared him down. "The economy is completely wrecked, Derek," I said, using the exact same words he had preached at my dining table on Sunday, with the exact same smug tone. "You gotta know how to maneuver, but let's be real. Your methods just aren't cutting it for the basics anymore. And with your accounts frozen, your money is literally worth nothing." Derek stared at me in terror. He recognized his own phrases. He recognized the poison he had injected into my home, now being pumped right back into his own veins. "I told you I didn't need help with my bank account," I continued, relentless. "But you insisted. You said the mental load was too much for me. Well, Derek, I am freeing you from that mental load. From today on, I will manage your financial future. I will decide when I drop the charges with the DA. I will decide when you get access to your cards back. And in the meantime, I promise you'll forget you ever had to go to the ATM to pull out cash, because you aren't going to be able to pull out a single dime. If you need cash for the grocery store, maybe Carrie will give you a little weekly allowance, if you behave." The word allowance hung in the air of the manager's office, heavy, crushing. It was the exact same concept he had used to reduce me to an incompetent child, weaponized now to seal his absolute ruin. "You're a monster," Derek whispered, backing up until he hit the glass wall again. The people on the ground floor were looking up, watching the silent spectacle of the cornered man. "No, Derek, I'm just a 72-year-old grandma who writes her passwords down in a hardcover ledger. And you're the financial expert who just lost absolutely everything because you didn't know who you were stealing from." Robert slammed the blue folder shut with a sharp crack that sounded like a gavel falling. "Suarez, bank security is about to escort you to the exit," the manager announced, pointing at the door. "Your accounts will remain locked indefinitely until the district attorney issues a ruling. If you attempt to enter another branch in this network to cause a scene, we will call the police immediately. I suggest you find a very good defense attorney, if you can find one who works for free. Get out of my office." Derek didn't protest. He didn't yell. The The fight had completely drained out of his body. He was hollowed out, humiliated in front of his wife, in front of the manager, and in front of every single customer watching him from the ground floor. He dropped his head, pushed the glass door open with shaking hands, and stepped out into the hall. We watched him walk down the spiral staircase slowly, dragging his feet, the security guard shadowing him 2 steps behind. He walked through the bank's main doors and disappeared into the street, swallowed by the city, turned into a ghost without a penny to his name. The silence returned to the office. Carrie let out the breath she had been holding and dragged her hands down her face, wiping away the cold sweat of the tension. "It's over, Mom," she said, with a mix of deep exhaustion and profound relief. I pulled my hardcover ledger out of my bag, flipped to a blank page, and pulled out a black ink pen. "Not yet, sweetheart," I replied, writing today's date in the top right corner of the page. "Now we have to organize how you're going to get your things out of that apartment before nightfall. There's a lot of work to do, and the week is just getting started." I tucked the black ink pen back into the inner pocket of my bag and snapped the hardcover ledger shut with a firm motion. The sound of the pressed cardboard slapping together was the only signal that the meeting had adjourned. Robert Castaneda watched us from across his mahogany desk. His posture was still strictly professional, but there was a gleam of deep respect in his eyes, the exact same respect he showed me 20 years ago when I'd walk into his office to audit the co-op's loan portfolios. I stood up from my chair, smoothing the creases of my dark pants. Carrie did the same beside me. My daughter wasn't shaking anymore. The sight of her husband begging for mercy and being escorted out by bank security had acted as an instant antidote to the fear that had paralyzed her for the last decade. "Thank you for your time, Robert," I said, reaching my hand across the desk, "and for acting with the speed the situation required. Institutions only function when the people running them have the courage to enforce the rules without exceptions." Robert shook my hand firmly. His grip was warm and steady. "You have nothing to thank me for, Martha. You taught me that numbers are the only defense against charlatans. The bank's legal department will maintain the level 3 freeze until the DA issues their resolution. Derek Suarez won't be able to move a single cent, not even to pay for bus fare. I'll mail a certified copy of the cybersecurity report to your house in case you need it for any further proceedings." "That sounds perfect. Have an excellent week." We walked out of the manager's office and headed for the spiral staircase. From the top, I took one last look at the bank's ground floor. The lines of customers were moving normally. The clatter of keyboards and dot matrix printers filled the air, and the security guard had returned to his post by the front door. The disruption Derek had tried to cause had already been absorbed and neutralized by the institutional machine. He was a discarded problem, a calculation error the system had already purged. We walked down the marble steps and stepped out into the street. The cold morning air slapped us with a reviving chill. The sun had climbed higher, lighting up the tops of the sycamore trees on the avenue, but the bite of the impending winter still seeped into your bones. We walked in silence for half a block, putting distance between us and the bank's tinted glass doors. "Mom," Carrie said, breaking the silence, her voice still a little raspy. "When you said we had to organize getting my things out of the apartment, did you mean right now? Today?" I stopped on the corner, right in front of the taxi stand, and turned to face her. Her eyes reflected a mix of anxiety and urgency. Half measures are what feed parasites, Carrie. Derek walked out of that bank with no money, no cards, and no dignity. His first instinct is going to be to seek shelter in the only place he still thinks he has power: your apartment. He's going to try and barricade himself in. He's going to try and use your things, your clothes, your furniture as hostages to force you to negotiate. We are not giving him that opportunity. By the time he manages to find someone to loan him the cash to get back, you aren't going to be there. I reached into my leather bag and pulled out the old phone, the rugged brick with the physical keys I had used yesterday to call Robert. I scrolled through the contacts saved on the internal memory, navigating the names with patience. I found the number I was looking for: Oswald, a former tractor driver, a man who now ran private freight runs with an old Ford F-150 that he kept in immaculate condition. I hit the green call button and pressed the phone to my ear. It rang twice. "Miss Martha," Oswald's deep, gravelly voice answered, backed by the rumble of a running engine. "Good morning, Oswald. I need an urgent freight run right this minute. It's a quick job. Just boxes, suitcases, and clothes. No heavy furniture. No appliances. Are you available? For you? Always, ma'am. I'm unloading some gear at the lumber yard on the highway, but I'll be done in 10 minutes. Tell me where I'm going. I gave him the address to Carrie's apartment, a 3-story brick building about 20 blocks from downtown. We agreed on an hourly rate, and I hung up. I dropped the phone back in my bag and flagged down the first cab in the line. Get in, sweetheart. We have work to do. The cab ride was short. Carrie stared out the window, looking at the streets of her own city, like she was seeing them for the very first time. We pulled up to the exposed brick building. I paid the fare with the small bills I always keep in a separate coin purse. We got out of the car and stood in front of the tempered glass front door. Carrie pulled her keychain out of her gray sweater pocket. Her hands weren't shaking. She slid the key into the lock, turned the cylinder, and pushed the door open. We walked up the stairs to the second floor. The hallway was dim, lit only by a small window at the far end. When we opened the apartment door, a stale smell hit us. It was a mix of the expensive, cloying cologne Derek wore too much of, combined with the smell of trapped air and unwashed laundry. The place was exactly how they had left it on Sunday morning. The bed unmade, a pair of leather shoes tossed in the middle of the living room, and a dirty coffee mug sitting on the coffee table. Grab the suitcases out of the closet, Carrie, and find some large trash bags for the shoes and coats. Don't waste time folding anything perfectly, just empty your shelves. My daughter nodded and headed into the master bedroom. I stayed in the living room, taking in the environment. The apartment was small, but Carrie had worked hard to decorate it. The curtains, the throw pillows, the framed prints on the wall, all of it had been bought with her pharmacy paychecks. Derek had only contributed a massive flat-screen TV that clashed with the rest of the furniture and took up almost the entire main wall. I went into the kitchen, opening the pantry drawers, looking for the cardboard boxes Carrie usually saved after grocery runs. I found 3 medium boxes folded up behind the trash can. I popped them open, taping the bottoms with some packing tape I found in a toolbox drawer. I carried the boxes into the bedroom. Carrie had already pulled out 2 large canvas suitcases and was throwing her clothes inside with fast, almost frantic movements. She was breathing heavy. She was exercising 10 years of submission with every single garment she ripped off the hangers. "Mom," she said suddenly, stopping dead. She was crouching in front of the nightstand on Derek's side of the bed. She had opened the bottom drawer, looking for some scarves she remembered stashing there at the end of last winter. I walked over to her. Carrie was holding a stack of papers bound with a rubber band. The edges of the papers were stamped with red ink and the logos of collection agencies. "What is that, sweetheart?" She handed me the stack. I adjusted my reading glasses and reviewed the documents. The first paper was an eviction notice from the law firm managing the building. It was dated 3 weeks ago. It cited a debt of 4 consecutive months of unpaid HOA fees, plus 3 months of unpaid rent. The second paper was a repossession notice from the car dealership. It demanded the immediate surrender of Derek's truck for failing to pay 6 consecutive installments, warning that the vehicle already had an active repo order filed in commercial court. Carrie covered her mouth with her hands, her eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of a deep, purifying rage. "He asked me for the money every single month! Mom, he told me he was going to pay the rent and the fees in cash because the leasing office gave him a discount. He took half my paycheck to pay the truck note. He kept all of it. We were going to get evicted next week, and he didn't tell me a thing." I looked at the papers. The evidence of the disaster was absolute. Derek wasn't just a blowhard chasing magic investments. He was a domestic con artist who had been bleeding his own wife dry, pushing her right to the edge of legal destitution. I folded the papers carefully and slipped them into my pants pocket. "Listen to me closely, Carrie," I told her, taking her face in my hands, forcing her to look me in the eye. "This is the very last time you are going to cry over this man's lies. Do you understand me? The very last time. These papers are the definitive proof that you walking out of this house isn't abandonment. It is an emergency evacuation. Now pack your things, leave his shirts, leave his shoes, leave his TV. You only take what you bought with the sweat of your own brow." She nodded, wiping her tears away with the sleeve of the sweater. The rage gave her a new surge of energy. In less than 40 minutes, we had filled the 2 suitcases, the 3 cardboard boxes, and 4 heavy-duty trash bags, with all her clothes, her books, her toiletries, and the few items of sentimental value she owned. The blast of the Ford F-150's gruff horn echoed from the street. I looked out the window. The old, reliable truck was double parked with its hazards flashing. We carried the stuff down in 3 trips. Oswald helped us load the bags and suitcases into the bed of the truck, arranging them with the exact same precision he used to stack seed bags in the co-op warehouses. He didn't ask any questions. Men of his generation know how to read a situation without needing an explanation. Before pulling the apartment door shut for the final time, Carrie stopped in the threshold. She looked at the empty space, the open closets, the unmade bed. She pulled her keychain out of her pocket, waited in her hand for a second, and then walked over to the coffee table in the living room. She dropped the keys on the wood, right next to Derek's dirty coffee mug. She stepped out into the hallway and pulled the door shut with a hard yank. The deadbolt clicked into place with a metallic, definitive snap. We climbed into the cab of Oswald's truck. The engine roared and we pulled away from the building. I looked at my daughter out of the corner of my eye. She was staring out the window, but this time there was no anxiety on her face. There was a massive, overwhelming peace. The peace of someone who just dropped a cinder block they've been carrying on their back for years. Time, when you clear out the emotional garbage, starts moving with an astonishing clarity. The following weeks were an exercise in methodical reconstruction. Carrie moved back into her childhood bedroom. At first, she slept 12 hours straight, recovering the rest that nervous tension had stolen from her for years. Then, slowly, she started getting her routines back. She went back to her job at the pharmacy without the crushing pressure of having to hand her money over to a husband who simply evaporated it. She started buying groceries for the house, cooking with me on the weekends, getting the color back in her cheeks and the light back in her voice. Derek vanished from our immediate orbit, but in a big town where everyone knows everyone, failure makes just as much noise as fake success. One afternoon, almost 3 weeks after the incident at the bank, I went down to the newsstand on the main avenue to buy the Sunday paper. Arthur was behind the metal counter, organizing some candy. When he saw me coming, his eyes lit up with that specific spark of someone who has fresh information and desperately needs to share it. "Good afternoon, Martha." "Great to see you," he greeted me, leaning his elbows on the counter and instinctively dropping his voice. "You know who I saw yesterday afternoon?" "Good afternoon, Arthur. Judging by your tone, I'd guess someone who isn't doing too well." Arthur let out a dry laugh. "Your son-in-law, or ex-son-in-law, I should say. I saw him at the gas station out on the highway, near the toll booth. I had gone out there to fill up my son's car. The kid looked like an absolute wreck. He was on foot, wearing a dirty jacket and beat-up shoes. Turns out he tried to buy a bag of tobacco and a soda inside the mini-mart. Tried to pay with his phone, using one of those modern apps. The machine declined it 3 times. The cashier told him the account popped up as frozen by court order. I didn't show any surprise. I pulled out the exact change for the newspaper and set it on the counter. Financial institutions are ruthless when they detect irregularities. Arthur. Ruthless is putting it mildly, Martha. The gas station attendant told me that last week a tow truck from the commercial court came and repossessed that massive truck he used to drive. They found him sleeping inside it, parked in an empty lot near the city impound. They made him get out with just the clothes on his back and hauled the vehicle away for non-payment. Now they're saying he's sleeping on a mattress on the floor of a mechanic shop owned by a buddy of his because the cops kicked him out of the apartment he was renting for not paying the HOA fees. I nodded slowly. Derek's financial collapse was the natural consequence of a castle built on lies, maxed out credit cards, and other people's money. By cutting off his access to my pension, the only source of actual liquid cash he had within reach, the castle had collapsed right on top of his head. I felt the deep tranquility of someone watching gravity work exactly the way it's supposed to. You reap what you sow, Arthur. Keep the change. I started the walk back home with the newspaper tucked under my arm. The very next day, the mailman dropped a manila envelope into my mailbox. It was an official subpoena from the district attorney's office. The automated cybersecurity report had run its bureaucratic course, and the ADA on duty required my presence to ratify the charges for attempted fraud and identity theft. I showed up at the DA's office on a Tuesday morning. The building was old, with peeling paint and hardwood floors that creaked under your shoes. The smell of old paper, stamp ink, and burnt coffee triggered the third recurring image from my past. A crystal-clear flashback to my early years at the co-op, when Robert, my husband, was still alive. I remember he went with me to City Hall once to file a formal complaint against an inspector who was shaking us down for bribes to approve a new warehouse. I was nervous, second-guessing whether I should hand over the accounting ledgers. Robert put a heavy, warm hand on my shoulder and told me, "Martha, documented truth is a brick wall. Liars can scream all they want, but they're just going to crack their heads open if they try to run through it. Show your papers." That memory was my shield as I waited in the hallway of the DA's office. They called me into a tiny office crammed with case files stacked on the floor. The ADA, a guy in his 50s with glasses sliding down his nose, looked at me over the top of his folders. "Miss Martha, we are here regarding the cybersecurity report from the Federal Reserve. The system indicates that a device registered to Derek H. Suarez attempted to link your pension account and executed an unauthorized transfer. Mr. Suarez submitted a statement through a public defender claiming this was a family misunderstanding, an attempt to help you with technology that you misinterpreted. Do you ratify that this was an attempted fraud without your consent?" I didn't hesitate for a single second. I pulled the hardcover ledger out of my bag, opened it to the page where I kept my original passwords written down, and pulled out the certified copy of the report Robert Castaneda had given me. "Mr. Prosecutor, I was the head treasurer of an agricultural co-op for 35 years. I managed payrolls for 100 employees and million-dollar balance sheets. I do not misinterpret technology or numbers. Mr. Suarez forcibly took my phone in my own home, changed my security credentials in violation of my privacy, and established a financial bridge to his personal account to drain my funds. It wasn't a mistake. It was premeditated theft. I ratify the charges in full." The prosecutor looked me in the eye. He saw the ice in my posture, the absolute clarity of my words, and the flawless documentation I laid out on his desk. He nodded, picked up a pen, and signed the ratification document. "We will proceed with formal indictment for aggravated financial fraud, ma'am. The defendant's bank accounts will remain under preventative embargo until the trial concludes. Have a good day." I walked out of the DA's office with the absolute certainty that the padlock had clicked shut forever. 6 months passed since that morning at the bank. Winter faded away, giving way to a bright spring that made the lemon tree in the backyard explode with green leaves. The Sunday routine in my house went back to being exactly what it always was, but with one vital difference. The tension was gone, replaced by a harmony you could literally breathe in the air. It was a Sunday at noon. The sun was pouring through the kitchen window. I was sitting at the head of the table, watching Carrie. My daughter was standing at the counter, prepping the rub for the roast. She minced the garlic and parsley with quick precision, pouring the olive oil with a steady hand. She was wearing a white apron and had her hair pulled back. Her posture was straight, her face was completely relaxed, and she was humming along to an old song playing softly on the radio. A month ago, using the savings she managed to stack up once she stopped paying Derek's debts, Carrie had bought herself a used car. A compact economy model with a few scratches on the paint, but it ran perfectly. The keys to the car were sitting on the table next to the flower vase, shining like a trophy of her reclaimed independence. She didn't have to ride the bus for 2 hours in the rain anymore. She didn't have to ask anyone's permission to go where she wanted. "Mom, should I put a little rosemary on the potatoes?" Carrie asked, turning toward me with a smile. "Go ahead, sweetheart. Rosemary gives it a rustic touch that goes great with roasted potatoes." Lunch went by in absolute peace. There was no roar of oversized engines in the street. There were no doors flying open. There were no complaints about the heat, no empty speeches about magic investments. We ate the tender roast. We talked about the pharmacy inventory and the tomato seedlings we were going to plant in the garden next week. After lunch, Carrie took care of washing the dishes. I got up from the table, kissed her on the forehead, and retreated to my bedroom. The house was quiet, a protective, thick, and gentle silence. I walked into my room. The afternoon sun caught the dust motes floating in the air. I walked over to the heavy oak wardrobe, opened the heavy door, and pulled down the old shoebox I kept tucked behind the winter blankets. The box that smelled like mothballs and preserved time. I sat on the edge of my bed with the box in my lap. I lifted the worn cardboard lid. Inside rested my original ID card, the gold debit card to my secret account, and my hardcover ledger. I took out the ledger and reached into my coat pocket for the black ink pen I always carry with me. I opened the book, flipping to the back section, the pages where I used to log extraordinary expenses and problems that needed solving. I turned the pages slowly, listening to the scrape of the thick paper. I reached the page where, 6 months ago, I had written the name Derek H. Suarez, followed by the date of that fateful Sunday and the word problem. I stared at the page for a few seconds. I listened to the sound of the water running in the kitchen, the dull clink of clean plates being stacked in the drying rack by my daughter's hands, the hands of a free woman. I uncapped the pen, pressed the tip of the ballpoint against the paper, and with a firm, slow, and absolutely precise motion, I drew a thick, black, definitive horizontal line, crossing out my ex-son-in-law's name from one side to the other. I blew on the wet ink for a second. I closed the hardcover ledger, tucked it back inside the shoebox, placed the gold card on top, and put the lid back on. I stood up from the bed. I placed the box back on the top shelf behind the blankets and shut the oak wardrobe door. The brass latch clicked into place with a dry snap, a small, perfect sound, sealing the matter forever in the quiet of my room.